I see these magnets of kind of people ops centered focus versus culture oriented focus. And I'd suggest that there's actually a different focus area that might be more important, and that is value creation.
Welcome to the HR Dialogues, where we learn from people practitioners as they navigate the emerging world of work. Andrew, there's so many wonderful words that I can use to describe you, from founding partner, educator, instructor, ex-CHRO. Maybe in your own words, what brings you to the HR Dialogues, and who is Andrew?
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for having me. What brings me here? Well, I was invited and I'm really honored. Today, actually, over the past 7 years or so, I stepped out of the in-house world and I started writing, I started teaching. I lead an executive education program. You mentioned it, People Leader Accelerator. I do a lot of different things, and it's all those centered around helping to support other HR leaders, helping them to be more effective.
Before we deep dive into the topic, and we'll be talking about the role of HR during pre-mergers and also during the merger and acquisition process, which I think is a topic that for most of us working in HR, if you've been in HR longer than 25 minutes, you would have been in some shape or form of acquisition, merger, massive transformation or restructure. But Andrew, we like to get to know our guests a little bit better. So maybe what's been the best career advice that you've received up to now across all the multitude of things that you've been doing?
Early in my career, right out of grad school, I worked at Pepsi. And manager at the time, John Beresford, he went on to become the CHRO of Pepsi Bottling Group. So his advice to me, wet behind the ears, first year out of grad school, he talked about the length of a career and the idea largely of delayed gratification. So he talked to me about a career as a marathon that ideally, if you plan ahead, and you build fantastic experience early in your career. Spend less time and effort trying to optimize for your paycheck or your location, but instead really optimize for quality of experience. You start to move up your director, VP plus in the second 10 years of your career. If you're doing this well, you're continuing to accumulate experience, but you're also accumulating some long-term wealth. And then, all right, now you're 20 years in, you've spent 10 years really optimizing for experience, second 10 years actively trying to stockpile some financial freedom. If you do that well, in the third 10 years of your career, and now you're in your 40s at that point, if you come right out of school, all the choices can be yours. You can shoot the moon and try to become chief HR officer of a public company, or really whatever function you're in. You can shoot the moon and aim for the heights.
I love that. I think especially in a world today where I think people are looking for shortcuts and quick fixes. And I'm extremely passionate, and something we also do at AIHR is to actually study the careers of people over time and to see how they exercise certain choices. And we're finding more and more that flexibility, autonomy, freedom is playing such a big role in the career landscape. But to your point, there's almost school fees you need to pay a little bit to be able to put yourself in a position to leverage those benefits. So Andrew, on that same note, can you give us a quick snapshot just in terms of your own career and how you've applied this particular principle? And along those lines, also, what makes you passionate about the field of HR?
Sure. Thanks. Well, it's been a long career already. I'm pushing 35 years at this point out of grad school, and I'm about to turn 50 in a few months. So, I started early, and it's been a path. I went to arguably the top master's degree in the HR field, University of Illinois. So I was able to land multiple internships with General Mills and Cummins Engine during the program, and then had a bunch of job offers coming off of campus. I selected from a few choices and picked Pepsi. And because at the time, Pepsi did not have a rotational program. They threw you into the deep end and you would sink or swim. And I wanted to bet on myself.
Nice.
So that worked out for me. And I went to the middle of nowhere. I was working outside Cleveland, Ohio in my first job. And then outside Detroit, Michigan, in my second job with Pepsi, and outside Minneapolis, but like all the flyover states in the United States. But I moved quickly and spent a handful of years there. And then we're in the midst of the .com boom, and a headhunter reached out to me and made a really compelling case. They said, this is your opportunity to lead a function, and you can, stay at this enterprise company for a long time, or you can do something really special. And, I bought it. And I sold myself hard to a professional services startup that was founded by leaders from McKinsey and Deloitte. And I was the first global head of human resources for a little company that doesn't exist anymore. We actually went bankrupt during the .com bust, but it was a wild ride. And we went global, and we grew from 20 people when I joined to 120 people at its height. Great experience. Also difficult experience, as I laid myself off. After that experience at the startup, I took a job at General Electric. Had a good run there. Joined a variety of different companies. So I've had a lot of stops. I won't mention all of them, but I moved through a series of leadership roles as an HR business partner. I led talent acquisition at scale. We were hiring 3,000 people a year in part of Washington Mutual's business. I led total rewards for a public company in the CPG space. And ultimately, I had my first CHRO role back in 2014. That's more than 10 years ago now. Private equity sponsors were in and out. We technically IPO'd twice. It was a couple of complicated financial transactions. And ultimately, I pulled my own parachute. Lots of change. Yeah. We moved headquarters from San Francisco Bay Area to Arizona, ultimately to Dallas. And with that last move, I didn't want to move my family. I was loving the job. I was loving the ride, but also the package was too good not to take it. And all my equity vested, at a year of severance. And, there I found myself in my early 40s at that point, pulling the parachute and trying to figure out what to do with myself. And so that led to what I'm doing now for the past 7 years. I wrote my bucket list book, started teaching, started my consulting and advisory practice, and caught on with a private equity company, helping them to support their portfolio company.
No, I can imagine, and a wonderful story, and I think such diverse experiences as well. And Andrew, I think it really sets us up quite nicely for why I invited you to our conversation today, and that is really to talk about the role of HR when we start thinking about mergers and acquisitions. I mean, I think the numbers tell the story. We've seen a lot of consolidation over the past number of years. I've also been involved in a couple of mergers and acquisitions from my side, wearing various different hats during the course of the process. And would love to tap into your wisdom a little bit around what HR's role is and what some of the misconceptions are about how we contribute value during the course of that process and what we need to do there. And I think a good starting point is to actually ask you the question around, what do people misunderstand about the role that HR plays during mergers and acquisitions?
I think maybe the greatest misconception is that a lot of people think it's mostly about the mechanics, like make payroll work, get everybody onto one system, harmonize benefits. Day one communications often pop to mind. So I see these magnets of kind of people ops centered focus versus culture oriented focus. And I'd suggest that there's actually a different focus area that might be more important. And that is value creation. Like, what is the logic for that transaction? Why are these companies coming together? Are you trying to increase distribution? Are you trying to reduce cost through corporate synergies? And, that means headcount coming out or marketing spend coming out. So I think the misconception is it's mechanics or it's culture. And I think the truth is it depends, but it depends on what in private equity, we call it the value creation plan, the VCP. What is the VCP of that transaction? And I'd suggest that we in HR should understand what that's based on and really directly focus on trying to support whatever that is. If that's cost out, like, let's do that.
And I really resonate with your point around what is the value that we are trying to create or to unlock, because I don't think we build enough time to really start understanding what is the narrative that we need to drive as part of this process and what is it rooted in. Because I think in any change process, there's always that question on, but why did we embark on this, and what's the rationale and the reasoning? And I think we often miss that bit. And then, exactly to your point, we jump into benefit harmonization and are everybody on the same system, and what do we do with misaligned employment contracts and terms and conditions, etc. Andrew, I want to put you on the spot a little bit, because I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment, right? We know sometimes HR gets involved way too late, right? So we're not in all the key conversations, and we can now debate, you should be in them. I absolutely agree, but sometimes you're not. What's the must-haves that if we start going into due diligence, and let's say that component is introduced and HR starts becoming involved, where should I start?
We in HR always want to be involved. We want to be at the table. We want to add value. That said, there are not a lot of must-haves before a letter of intent is signed. Now, before a transaction closes, different story. But once you get an LOI and hopefully exclusivity on a deal, then your CFOs are talking to each other, your deal teams are talking to each other. You've got a data room that's opened up. Hopefully the value creation plan is really clear at that point. I think it's really important that the acquired organization, that there are conversations with the senior leadership team and key members of the staff of the acquired organization. Now, I think HR is frankly best positioned to do that. Usually the investing teams are having those conversations as well. The bankers don't really get into that. They're mostly working in spreadsheets. But yeah, the investing team is having conversations, but it's really helpful to have a professional that's thinking about org structure, org design, org effectiveness, to speak with the humans, understand what their expectations are, ask them what their recommendations are to support the value creation efforts. Like, hey, if we're pursuing a roll-up strategy, and that means that we're trying to add size, scale, geographic distribution to this, business platform, and that means that we're going to do a bunch of these. Hey, team that's coming over, what do you think would help make that successful? And have a aware and involved, but some professional distance from the person doing that. Like if the investing partner is doing it, like that, all of their incentives are just to get the deal done, get it across the line, right? If it's a third-party consultant that's totally outside, I don't know. They're probably working the clock and trying to log as many billable hours as they can. I'm cynical about that.
No, of course.
But if it's somebody that's embedded, that understands the team that they're going to, and is living with it after the fact, and that's the HR leader, or somebody, if you're a large company on the HR leader's team, have those human conversations to understand what's going on. Now, I've been involved in literally dozens of these, a dozen plus as an in-house operator, and multiple dozens over the past 5 years in PE. And what I've found is a lot of times there's reticence to getting HR involved. There's fear of having those conversations. Like, we don't want to create risk in the organization. Like, what if the wrong thing is said, or what if there are assumptions, and what if we don't know if we want to keep this person or these people in general? Like, maybe we should wait. I would say it's a must-have. Like, have those conversations, frame up what you can and will share and what you won't.
What I found, over the years as well, I think there's definitely your last point I resonate with a lot. Know what you're walking into. I think that's super important, because that also gives you a good idea of what that first 90 days, 120 days is going to look like when you start putting certain foundations in place to get the real work to go in terms of the post-merger and acquisition integration. For me, it's always been, the first one is, who's going to be the guiding coalition that's going to really drive this process, even though that might not be the final roles that people end up with, but who's going to create that leadership and momentum, from both sides of the organization or just from the one side, depending on what the structure of the deal is going to look like. I think the second part you've mentioned in terms of get org design in there as quickly as possible, know at least how we are going to start thinking about the way that this engine is going to function. And then the third one, a bit that I'd love your view on, is I do think the culture piece is quite important, at least in terms of understanding where is there certain shared beliefs that we can leverage to create momentum, and where is there stumbling blocks that we need to avoid. So I would love your view kind of on especially that last one, because I know that trips people up quite a bit. And then they say, yeah, the culture's not right or wrong. It's just different. How do we really know? Yeah. So how do we tackle that piece?
I'm smiling because there's this old chestnut that's used way too often, and it's often just not true. Best of both worlds.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going to take the best things at both of these organizations, the best cultures, and they're pretty much the same anyway, and here's how they come together. That is not true in 99% of the situations. And I think that inexperienced leadership teams or bankers that are trying to jam a deal are incented to just have as little short-term disruption as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so that leads to these inaccurate, maybe well-intended, but inaccurate statements about best of both worlds and combination, and we're basically the same anyway. I think the best thing that an acquiring organization can do, and there's always an acquiring organization, like a merger is not
Absolutely.
a merger. A merger is an acquisition, and somebody has 51% and somebody's got board control. Like, just clarity is maybe the most important thing that you can provide. Who's going to run this thing?
Yeah.
What are we trying to do? Where is value being created? I worked at Wells Fargo for a handful of years. They acquired Wachovia, and that was bumpy in a lot of ways. There are a lot of things I think that they could do better, but one of the things they did really, really well was their acquisition strategy. And they had a stated approach, which was step one, take control. Step one, tell people who makes the decisions.
Yeah.
And actually, this was the largest banking merger in history. Wachovia and Wells Fargo, Wells being the giant West Coast U.S. bank, and Wachovia having a similar presence on the East Coast out of North Carolina. U.S. government, stepped in, stepped out. Wells jumped in. First communication to all employees was the severance plan.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Which would created a lot of emotion and angst. But as we thought about it, here's a safety net. Like, here's the worst case scenario. If you lose your job, you get a 90-day notice and you get a very generous severance package where nobody's really worried about their ability to find a job if they get this notice and this severance and okay, let's see how this is going to work out. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend all employee email on severance package. So there, debatable whether that was perfect, but the clarity that came with who's running this place and what are we trying to accomplish, rather than the pablum or the corporate speak of nothing's going to change. You still have autonomy. I think that's just not true. Yeah. And one more comment on this before we move on, is that I think there's also this tendency to kick the can down the road.
Oh, spot on.
You have an acquisition and you say, well, let's just let them run independently. Let's not get in the way. They've been successful. We'll get to know each other over time. That leads to all sorts of angst along the way because you're not providing clarity as to what the future will be. I would just beat the drum of clarity. What are we trying to accomplish? Who's running the show? How do things work? The sooner and the more fully that you can explain that to the top and bottom of the organization, that usually the healthier the outcome is.
I think even if you can't create, I think clarity on all the different aspects, I think even just that conversation to say, these things we are still figuring out, but by then, X date, this is what we are going to give feedback on. Because I agree with you. I've seen a lot of these processes fail miserably when we sugarcoat what we are really doing, and we drive a very false, inauthentic narrative, and you almost lose the faith that you had in either side of the fence in terms of the organization with the new leadership coming in.
Yep.
And I worked with a CEO who was also going through an acquisition process of buying up a whole bunch of smaller entrepreneurial businesses and folding them into one new group structure. And something that he did really well, which has stuck with me over the years, is the first one, he made it very clear that he's the group CEO of these organizations, and that there is certain elements that he will have the final say in.
Yeah.
And he's very open to input, and he's very open to people's perspectives and views, but ultimately he's the decision maker about certain elements. It was amazing for me the amount of safety that provided in the newly established executive team, right? Because immediately people kind of knew where they were playing with regards to that, which I thought was really, really powerful. And then your other point, be very clear, there's always a power player in the room. And I'm not talking about an individual, I'm talking about the organization. So when we say things like our cultures are very similar, they are not going to be. Somebody's going to have a stronger hand in dictating what that's going to look like. And it's not a bad thing, but that's the reality. So don't underestimate the intelligence of your own people and having that kind of the view of what's happening. Andrew, on that note, people worry that key talent leaves. And I know in some instances they do, right? I think especially where these processes are handled quite badly. And very often the reason why I acquire an organization is very much for the human capital that comes with it, especially in some key parts of the organization. So any advice you can give for HR leaders listening to this to say, how do I look after that cohort of people that's going to be crucial to not only the process of mergers and acquisition and integration, but the future organization?
In the absence of clarity, we humans tend to jump to the worst conclusions. We have all sorts of fears and anxieties spin up, right? So fill the void, drive the message, own the message, be proactive about all the questions that are likely circulating in people's heads that, again, are likely to steer towards negative outcomes. So provide clear, definitive messaging as soon as you can. If you don't have an answer on something yet, acknowledge the issue and provide updates along the way, what's changing, what's not. If something's changing that affects a key group, let's say there's a key account executive population that's worried about their incentive structure, and the acquiring organization has one plan and they've got another, and they're talking behind the scenes in one way or another. They know each other. They're out in the market. Let them know, hey, we acknowledge that our sales teams have different structures and different methodologies, and we are either going to keep it separate for the foreseeable future, which again, I would be skeptical about, or we're analyzing to figure out what works best. Yeah. And we will involve a small group of you to be part of that decision so that we can understand it better. Those are involving people, communicating to people. That's what builds trust and encourages stickiness. What doesn't work typically is cash retention plans. That seems to be one of the most used but least effective mechanisms in mergers. Okay, we're going to pick the CEO, the CFO, the head of sales. They're all going to get some form of cash retention, where if they're still here 6 months from now or a year from now, they'll get some payout that's a percentage of their base pay. Great, but let's unpack that. Not everybody's getting that. So you have this group of haves and have-nots. And so the people that don't get it are incented to go because it's clear they don't want us or don't need us as much. The people that do get it, it's not anything that another employer couldn't buy them out of. In fact, it's kind of a nice sign for a future employer. I love hiring people with retention plans because that means that they were good. And so, I'll go ahead and, my company will pay a prorated part of it.
I love that, right? Because I think there's a couple of things that stand out for me from what you've mentioned, right? The first one, it boils down to a little bit in terms of you can't really buy people's commitment in the longer term through incentives that don't work. I think also you are automatically, as you've just mentioned, you're creating an in and an out group, and people are very much aware of that. And I think you send certain signals to the market around who is this group of people that is instrumental to your success. And to your point, I think especially in larger corporates, money has never been the stopping point of why talent don't jump elsewhere. That's a very easy one to solve for if you have the means to do so. So I really like that idea around thinking very differently, and almost to bring back to your point around clarity. I think if you can give clarity also around what the new world looks like for the talented people that will be there, and I think they start speaking to, but what are the challenges that they will get to solve? What is the type of things that they will be involved in, etc.? I think that's a much better kind of motivating carrot, because I think you're creating that meaningful work design component for them, as opposed to kind of the transactional piece that I think is unfortunately very much the preference of a lot of organizations. I want to move us to the conversation around what does success look like? And I've always had this question posed to me a couple of times. When is the merger and acquisition over? When is this the new normal that we've now moved into?
I don't think that the origin stories or the history is ever fully and truly lost.
Yeah,
You're going to be talking about a merger that happened decades ago. When it's air quote over, is I think, and maybe this is a financial way of defining it, is when the impacts of that merger are no longer being felt. Like you no longer have a enhanced severance plan. Yeah. You are no longer carrying extra headcount because you're still trying to figure out what the outcomes will be. You have finished articulating your future state, mission, vision, values, and what your culture to be. You've made those key decisions, and you are in a air quote business as usual operating structure. So all the special stuff has run out. And I frankly don't think it's realistic to say people are ever going to stop talking about it, or people will ever lose some connection to a predecessor organization. So I wouldn't define it in terms of like human memory. It would be in terms of operating process.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to double click a little bit on it, because I think if you do this well, you can celebrate the origin story as a chapter of what has brought us here, and, kind of where we are as the chapter of what does it look like in terms of how we move forward. Because I've also seen, from an org identity point of view, and I'm not talking about the brand, I'm talking about the deeper seated beliefs and cultural values, that where you ignore where those things come from, organizations tend to run into a lot of conflict and things that they don't understand that just never clicks and never feels right. And they play out in different ways, in bubbling to the surface in some operational, inefficiencies, sometimes just some very bad behavior. And on the other side, some really misaligned views on certain elements. But I do think on the other side, it is quite valuable also for people to say, the integration plan runs for the next X amount period of time. These are the 7 things we're going to do well. And by that point in time, we will kind of start shifting into that, business as usual mode, and what the cutover is going to look like. I think again, to get back to your point of certainty and clarity, because I think that also helps a little bit just set the tone for, kind of optimizing and leveraging that value that you wanted to see at the beginning, right?
I agree. I think it would be helpful in any sort of significant transaction to identify the KPIs of success early on. And there will be some human capital KPIs. There will be plenty of commercial and financial KPIs. Like, track those and share. And did we meet our goal or not? And how are we doing?
Andrew, my last question before we start wrapping up is, if I'm an HR professional, I might be in the midst of a merger and acquisition. I might know that we are preparing for one. What advice do you have in terms of just helping me know where to start?
Where to start? I think it would first be to calibrate yourself as to the highest and best role that you can play, right? And so that's probably not just the people ops harmonization of systems and policies. It's probably not just the culture. It's getting your mind wrapped around some of the things that we talked about, which is like understand what you're trying to accomplish and make sure that your work ladders up to that really, really quickly. And I'd say a trap is falling into this environment of being an order taker and staying in your lane, or using the words, I'm not a numbers person. Ooh, like, please do not self-sabotage like that. Like, have a point of view, understand what you're trying to accomplish, and proactively present your vision and plan. Some leaders still won't be willing to involve you as much as you might be beneficial. And hey, you can make a choice about what organization to be a part of, and maybe
Mm.
you're part of a transaction that, on the front end, you're like, hey, I'd like to be involved, differently next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So don't fall too much into the trap of being an order taker and letting other people define what your work is.
Yeah.
I think more agency can and should be taken by more HR leaders, but like be cautious about falling into the role of being the person that everybody complains to, and then you're burdened with these complaints where you feel like you need to take it someplace, and focus more on the value creation. And the feelings are going to be there, and maybe the best way to move through those feelings is to drive clarity and drive decision making. Even if you're not the decision maker, you can highlight the benefits of providing more clarity faster.
No, absolutely. Andrew, a couple of things that stood out for me really from our conversation. I think the first one, you really brought the point home around value creation and being absolutely sure from the get-go around why is this happening, and building a narrative around the value that we will unlock and create with the transaction and what that looks like in the future. Love the idea that you also said that avoid terminology like the best of both worlds. Things will be the same down the line, or, we will coexist for a period of time. And I think they're almost to be a little bit more bullish around what this is and what this is not and what it is going to look like. And, that fed very much also into your conversation around senior leadership alignment, how that plays out into the culture work we need to do. Loved your ideas also around moving away from transactional incentive for the key talent you want to keep. What's that deeper commitment that we want to drive to them in terms of being involved here? And if we only take one thing out of today, create clarity as quickly as we can, avoid the traps, and have agency as an HR professional around the role and the value that you bring towards both the transaction and the work that needs to happen. Andrew, from my side, such a joy speaking to you, and thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience. Where can people find you and follow your great work, and where can they get hold of you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Andrew Bartlow. I'm on LinkedIn. And check out the People Leader Accelerator website. It's peopleleaderaccelerator.com. It's a mouthful, but there's a lot there too.
Andrew, thank you so much. And for everybody joining us today for the HR Dialogues, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you in our next episode.